let's meander through the indie side of horror. That's the part of horror that doesn't get the ad space, the food truck, or any of the bells and whistles most horror films you've heard about get. This is Low Budget Binge, so let's start binging. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go. Texas Chainsaw Mascara is new on Blu-ray from Zebub Productions and MVD. It's directed and written by Zebub. With a name like Texas Chainsaw Mascara, I had to check it out. But this is another Zebub production, which I didn't know, but I realized as soon as I popped this Blu-ray in. For those who don't know, Zebub is a low-budget filmmaker who specializes in exploitation horror films that most of the time features women in various states of undress, dudes waxing about politics and social issues, and lots of blood and boobs. Zebub fancies himself a sleazier version of Kevin Smith, as his films are heavy on dialogue, but never forgets his rocker roots as he places just enough emphasis on highlighting unknown hard rock and death metal songs playing over highly stylized music video-esque scenes. It's not for everyone. Hell, it's not really for me, but as an avid Texas Chainsaw Massacre fan, I had to check it out. If you've seen one of Zebub's films, you've seen them all. This one has a group of 30 or 40-something horror fans who set out to Texas to see the house where the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was filmed. Their car breaks down, and a local gal comes to their aid, leading them back to her home, to her wheelchair-bound husband, played by Zebub, and brother Piggy, played by Mark Pierce, who wears a pig-face mask, of course. The sightseers are bound, tortured, and made to strip after the family overhears the two of the guys joking about raping their rescuer. What transpires is the family killing one of the sightseers, and then the sightseers group upping the ante by killing one of the family. Soon the bodies of both groups pile up, leading to an ending set to dramatic music. Honestly, the story isn't the worst. The two groups start the violence against each other, and the violence begets more violence as retribution. It humanizes the Texas hillbilly family, though they are pretty weird with that pig mask, and then there's the making people strip thing. Then again, the sightseers do think they're above the hillbillies and are pretty damn obnoxious. The main problem with all of Zebub's movies is that when they aren't busy stripping gals down to their skivvies or rocking out to thrift shop Evanescence, the discussions go on, and while Zebub occasionally comes up with a decent point or two, the repetitious droning and pontificating makes my fast-forward finger ultra-heavy. Zebub seems to have quite the issue with the hypocrisy of woke culture, but seems to have no issue with criticizing them with the same uppity and sanctimonious attitude he accuses them of having. There's very little gore, lots of nakedness, and too much talk in Texas Chainsaw Mascara. The film runs way too long for what it has to offer. Some of the songs are okay, but a little of Zebub's style goes a long way. If you're a fan of Zebub films, here's another one, but I wouldn't recommend it to anyone else. The Dogman Triangle, Werewolves in the Lone Star State, is a documentary, new on-demand, digital download, and on Blu-ray from Small Town Monsters. It's directed by Seth Breedlove and based on the book by Aaron Deese. Seth Breedlove, who has made a living investigating cryptids, mainly Bigfoot, for Small Town Monsters, turns his camera towards Bigfoot's grumpy cousin, the Dogman, in The Dogman Triangle, Werewolves in the Lone Star State. The documentary takes us to Texas, where Dogman researcher Aaron Deese teams up with paranormal investigator and skeptic Shannon Legros to try to get to the bottom of mysterious sightings of a canine-like creature that walks on two legs. Deese has narrowed these sightings down to a trio of points in Texas, hence the triangle, and interviews various witnesses who swear they've seen the creature roaming along the side of dark roads and through even darker forests. One might think that since I want to believe Bigfoot is real, that I'd buy into the Dogman stories. But for me, I just can't do it. Sure, both are large hairy beasts,
But to me, the fact that bones of large primates have been found, though thousands of years old, at least makes it plausible that somewhere, somehow, Bigfoot might actually exist. There's also a lot of compelling evidence to support that theory. Since there's been no such evidence provided for the Dogman, it seems more like misinterpretation of existing animals and wild imaginations. But what do I know? Still, my interest has always been not just if these cryptids exist, but why people believe in them. Now, some of the good old boys chatting it up with the investigators might have opened up about the Dogman to get themselves on the TV, but at the same time, most of the interviewees seem earnest in their belief in the creature. And while I stand firmly in the skeptic's corner in the argument about the existence of Dogman, this documentary does a great job of presenting some very intriguing stories. Accompanying these stories are some great artist renderings and what looks to be computer art, maybe even AI art, depicting the creature. These images are indeed terrifying, guaranteeing that I definitely would not want to run into this monster. And while Bigfoot is often looked at as a general protector of the woods, the Dogman seems to be its ferocious opposite. Who knows? Maybe there are creatures like this, as the documentary does state that the repeated occurrences of a Dogman-like monster in all sorts of cultures from around the world. The doc points out that Texas has a large German and French population, where werewolf lore is strong. Pair that with the Native American tales of the Skinwalker, and that makes Texas a likely spot for these creatures to habitate, or at least have stories passed down from generation to generation around the campfire. Examining whether the Dogman is a mere campfire tale, mystical beast, or elusive species, the Dogman Triangle is another great documentary for cryptid lovers, believers, and skeptics. The Long Dark Trail is new on Blu-ray and DVD from 418 Films and Cleopatra Entertainment. It's directed and written by Kevin Ignatius and Nick Psinakis. A pair of brothers run away from their abusive father to track down their mother, who left the family to be a member of a cult. The film is segmented into short chapters, depicting the brothers' arduous trek through a thick forest along a long dark trail. While the story is very light, it's basically just a couple of kids walking and riding their bikes through the woods, with a few nightmare sequences tossed throughout sporadically, and the acting is very amateur. The Long Dark Trail never bored me. I think this is mainly because of the truly effective score that dominates the entire film. While at times the tone is overdramatic, it's pretty amazing how much the accompanying music elevates the material, giving scenes gravitas and power that almost overrides the film's low-budget trappings. I know that saying the best part of the film is the music is not a ringing recommendation, but it does, nevertheless. The Long Dark Trail, for the most part, is an extremely simple concept and executed in a very rudimentary way. There's some surprisingly effective gore towards the end, and a few shocking scenes of nightmare and hallucination as the kids take this long dark trail. All in all, the Long Dark Trail's intentions are good, but the final product just isn't great. But still, that score, using natural and unnatural sounds and beats, makes up for those issues quite a lot. The Barn Part 2 is new streaming on Screambox that's directed and written by Justin M. Seaman. I liked The Barn enough. It was meant to be a love letter to old-school horror fans with a trio of supernatural slashers rising from a pit of hell and killing a bunch of folks. It had practical effects, a low-budget attitude, and some hammy acting and comedy. And that's pretty much what the creators of The Barn Part 2 has to offer in the sequel. Having been the sole survivor in the last installment of The Barn, Michelle, played by Lexi Drips, is still trying to piece her life back together 2 years later. Now in college, Michelle suggests her sorority sisters put on a Halloween haunted house party as a fundraiser and finds the perfect place to hold it. A barn, of course. Since the last time the town celebrated Halloween went so well, as depicted in the first movie, the town council, led by the mayor, played by Lloyd Kaufman, and the local Bible thumper, Sarah, played by Linnea Quigley, are unaware that the party is happening. But when the new portal opens up in the new barn, monsters, demons, and zombies are unleashed upon the town, forcing the town council and a handful of kids to team up and take them on with all sorts of edged weaponry. This was pretty much what happened in the first barn, though Part 2 has a larger scope. It actually leaves the barn and heads into the nearby city. The cast is much bigger too, with all sorts of cameos from Doug Pinhead Bradley, to Ari Young Jason Lehman, to Joe Bob Briggs, to Diana Darcy the Mail Girl Prince. Most likely, The Barn Part 2 was scheduled to be filmed to coincide with a flashback weekend or some other horror convention where all kinds of obscure horror names were able to film a scene or two for the film. These cameos aren't bad per se, but these characters are basically playing themselves, wearing the same type of stuff they usually wore to the horror convention. Watching The Barn Part 2 is almost like walking down the celebrities table aisle at a con, wondering which blast from the past you're going to run into next. The expanded story has some trouble feeling natural, as half the time is simply a bunch of gals and guys getting offed by the monsters as they make their way through the haunted house attraction, usually turning the theme of the room they are in back upon the people working there. It's very repetitious. So you get an S&M mock-up room that is besieged by a corn monster who ties up his victims, and a mad doctor's office where the minor monster dissects them. These scenes are fun, but the more they occur, the less they contribute to the actual story. The film ends big, with all the stars taking on about 20 monsters, ghouls, zombies, and demons. It does get pretty bloody. It was especially fun to see Linnea Quigley covered in blood and brandishing a chainsaw again, but a lot of the effects are simply extras wearing masks that look like they were purchased from a clearance sale from Spencer Gifts. The acting is pretty rough too, with the lead, Lexi Drips, doing a decent job at the beginning, but later in the film, when she's supposed to have some heavy emotional beats, seems too much for her to fully achieve. As I said earlier, the star appearances are the highlight of the movie, while everything else is pretty low tier. Still, I don't want to rag too much on The Barn 2. It once again seems to be a labor of love made by people who are lifetime horror fans and wanting to put out as much homages and callbacks in the film as possible. The problem is that, with the original being 7 years ago, it doesn't feel like there has been a lot of growth from all involved, as The Barn Part 2 feels like a rehash of what they did before. It's campy, harmless, sometimes gory fun, but I could only give it a mild recommendation. PEPPERGRASS is new on demand and digital download from Black Fawn Distribution. It's directed and written by Stephen Garbas and Chantelle Hahn. At the height of COVID, a pair of broke bartenders, played by Chantelle Hahn and Charles Boyland, have a plan to make quick cash by stealing some prized truffles from a reclusive truffle farmer. But once the heist goes sideways, they find themselves lost in a dark forest with an angry farmer and his monstrous pig eager for their blood. PEPPERGRASS is a moody and atmospheric man versus nature film where the bulk of the movie is dedicated for the leads to survive the harsh environment they've found themselves lost in. The film is a dark one, and I don't mean tone. Much of the movie is bathed in shadows, and though I never lost track of who's who due to the very small cast, it is difficult to make out specific details going on due to the lack of light. But even though the picture is obscured, PEPPERGRASS tells an arduous survival tale featuring some high-maintenance people having difficulty making it in the wild. The film takes its time unfolding and allows the characters of Eula, played by Beck, and Morris, played by Boyland, to show off their many bizarre traits. Eula, even though she is fighting for her life, takes the time to reapply eye makeup throughout the film, which some might read as a vapid aspect of her personality, but for me, it seems like she does this as a soothing mechanism to deal with her anxiety. Morris, on the other hand, uses cocaine to ironically temper his nerves. Both characters show a lot of depth in very little screen time, making them interesting characters to follow. While the truffle farmer is shrouded in shadow most of the time, he does work well as the major threat here. From his ability to blend into the shadows, his high-powered and highly precise gun, to his control of his boar-sized pig, he's very much a force to be reckoned with. Though I feel there could have been a few more scenes with the pig, the film does a good job of throwing a lot of danger at our protagonists to deal with. This is obviously a COVID-era film. It works the lockdown into the plot, so the scope is limited and the cast is small. That said, filmmakers Stephen Garbas and Chantelle Hahn, who also stars in the movie, do a great job of keeping the tone of the survival movie dire all the way through. There are late-in-the-game themes of Eula's lack of faith and commitment, as well as themes of responsibility, greed, and revenge. Some are just touched upon, others are glossed over and barely mentioned, but they are present, even though they could have been more so to make for a more resonant film. As is, PEPPERGRASS is a survivalist version of Nick Cage's recent masterpiece, Pig, without all of that deft character work and compelling insight into the truffle and cooking industry. It's a functional tale of a battle against the elements of nature and the greedier aspects of humanity. Finally, we have The Hopewell Haunting. It's new on demand and digital download from Dark Sky Films. It's directed and written by Dane Sears. It's Kentucky, 1930, and a preacher, played by Ted Ferguson, is approached by a desperate family asking him to bless their house, which they feel is haunted by haints, aka unsettled ghosts. When the preacher arrives, things go from bad to worse as the house is indeed haunted and housing deep, dark secrets best left buried. Produced by two of my favorite filmmakers, Dwayne Graves and Justin Meeks, who were responsible for The Wild Man of the Navidad, Butcher Boys, and Killer Be Killed, The Hopewell Haunting starts out not like a haunted house movie, but a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. I'm not saying that there is a chainsaw-wielding maniac with a taste for faces, but the way the film is shot and the palpable atmosphere that permeates The Hopewell Haunting pays homage to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, more so than I've seen any film do so since The Wild Man of the Navidad, which was produced by the same people. In The Hopewell Haunting, you can feel the sticky country heat, the flies buzzing around the actors, and the insects providing their own natural soundtrack to the film. On top of that, there are scenes that feel worn down and made with an indie feel that conveys an unnatural tone. There are scenes focusing on the moon that open and close scenes, pans and zooms that are somewhat unsteady, all giving the film a renegade feel, as if this is something made outside of the mainstream and accepting it wholeheartedly. Like TCM, the violence in The Hopewell Haunting is only hinted at. The film opens with a scene of absolute horror as we as the audience only hear someone being assaulted in some way. While the violence is never shown, the sounds of screaming, struggle, and some kind of domestic terror is harrowing as the camera focuses on the decimated house that the events most likely occurred in sometime in the past. There are moments where the tormented ghost appears to the preacher, and those are effectively spooky as well, but it's these screams and the hints of violence that hit the hardest. The Hopewell Haunting is a slow burner. It basically is a story about a preacher going to a house 3 times, the third ending with a confrontation with a restless spirit which haunts the house. The ending feels somewhat wholesome and downright quaint. The acting is capable, but leaves a lot to be desired. But it's the feel of the Hopewell Haunting that really worked for me. Eventually, there will be another Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Usually, my biggest issue with these sequels is that while the chainsaws and Leatherface are there, the tone of the original is something no one seems to be able to harness. Well, the folks behind The Hopewell Haunting have harnessed the unharnessable. It's captured the dark, dank tone Tobe Hooper and company did so well back then and reframed it in an intimate story about a small-town haunting. From the standpoint of atmosphere and tone, The Hopewell Haunting is a true gem. Well, that'll be it for this week's Low Budget Binge. Have you seen any of these, or do you plan on seeing any of them? Let me know down in the comments.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're doomed. Oh, you're doomed. You're doomed. You're doomed. Live the life that you are meant to be. Live inside that reality.